I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play in these beautiful lands. So welcome, and thank you for coming to our marquee noon hour session, where we are exploring diversity and leadership. My name is Christina Casse, and I'm with the City of Vancouver. So we're still excited, we're very excited to have you here and be part of the Women Deliver satellite sessions as a whole. It's 4 days, June 3rd to June 6th, jam-packed with thought-provoking discussions, workshops, and much, much more. A quick housekeeping item in case anyone does need to use the restroom. It's out either those doors or these doors and to the right. And yes, that's where those washrooms are. And I'd like to invite you, after this session, if you have time, to visit a free exhibition that we have on the 8th floor titled Women Deliver Cities. The display documents the work of 24 local women artists from Vancouver for whom the built environment is both their subject matter and their field of action. So if you have some time, please do go check it out. It's quite a wonderful display. So right now, to start things off for your session, I'd like to introduce you to Emily Mills. Emily is the founder of How She Hustles, a Toronto-based network with a reach of 10,000 diverse women that connects through social media and special events. The events focus on entrepreneurship and leadership, attracting as many as 400 guests from CEOs to Olympians. A frequent public speaker, Emily holds degrees in journalism and music, and she studied public relations. She's a proud wife and mom of 2 active boys, and she's also very proud to be on the Women Deliver National Committee, which is how we got her. Just one more thing I wanted to say, sorry that was a bit awkward. If you do want to connect with her on social media, through Instagram or Twitter, her handle is How She Hustles. So please welcome Emily to the front.
Good afternoon. Oh, come on. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, because I'm from Toronto. I can't come to Vancouver, and I'm like, these people were very quiet. Hello, friendly people.
Hi.
I'm really excited for this conversation, and I'm very honored to be here, so thank you very much for having me. A few things I just want to say up front. I think this conversation is going to be inspiring and empowering. But I also know that for some people, if we're really honest, it might be a little bit triggering or challenging. And I say that also myself, as a woman of color in leadership, that often these conversations happen in private or not in front of a live audience. So I encourage us all, and we spoke as a collective about really trying to make this a supportive space. If for any reason you feel like you just need a minute to yourself or you feel uncomfortable, that's totally fine. Take your minute. I know we are all going to be kind to each other. Just also being mindful that this is being live streamed. So if you are going to share or ask a question, just be mindful of that. And at the end, we should have about 15 minutes for questions and hope to get you out of here by 1 o'clock. Now, I'd like to introduce our amazing speakers, who I met for the first time 5 minutes ago. But we did talk on the phone. So, right beside me is Jennifer Reddy, she, her pronouns, or they. Elected to the Vancouver School Board in October of 2018. Can we clap for that? Yeah. She has a master's in social policy and development from the London School of Economics, a bachelor in development studies from the University of Calgary, and a certificate in curriculum development and instructional design from Mount Royal University. She's one of the founders of EduCo, an organization using mentorship programs to support students in their educational goals. Please welcome Jennifer. And by the way, for anybody who's like, she's really going to read all 3 bios, assistant professor in industrial design. She's currently an instructor at Emily Carr University of Art and Design. She's a product and food designer with a focus on community building and sustainable design. She has a Master's of Design from Emily Carr University, a Master of Science in Food Design from, I can't even say this university's name, in Italy. You can say it for me.
Scuola Politecnica de Design.
There we go. And she's co-founder of the Fieldwork Design Collective in Vancouver, as well as on the board of directors of the Bois Foundation. Thank you so much. All right. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Zena Sharman, she, her. She's a writer, speaker, strategist, and LGBTQ health advocate with an amazing blog. She is the director of strategy at the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research. She's the editor of 2 books, including the award-winning anthology, The Remedy, Queer and Trans Voices on Health and Healthcare. She co-chairs the board of the Catherine White Holman Wellness Center, a low-barrier wellness clinic for trans and gender diverse people. We ready to talk?
Yes.
Yeah, so please welcome everybody. So I hope this is going to be a very organic exchange, but I did ask our speakers if we could begin with answering kind of one question, or at least sharing one a sense of remark. Jennifer, I've asked Amanda, and I've asked Zena to please define for us what you think leadership is. Sorry.
Should I start? Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jennifer. Thank you so much for taking time to be here. I was so nervous, but I see you and I just wish I could take all of you together to like a party afterwards. We really need spaces like this. So leadership to me is this. It's showing up for people, for women of color. I don't always know why I'm invited to panels, but I have a hunch that it's because I tick a few boxes. I'm a woman of color, I'm youngish, and those are some of the reasons why I was elected in October, but also some of the reasons why I wasn't selected by some folks. Constantly being credentialed, so yes, listing my credentials is really important for me. Being asked if I'm Canadian, if I've got enough experience to run in politics in Canada, all of that stuff is real, and it does pose challenges to both how leadership is seen both by myself and whether or not I think I'm a leader, but also how others perceive me as a leader or not as a leader, because I may not be enough of several categories. So for me, a lot of the political sort of public-facing aspect of leadership is around first celebrating that we got one. We got a woman of color, we're good to go, they're all represented in me. Super scary assumptions, but it does happen, right? And so everyone's celebrating, yay, we've got a woman of color. And then the inevitable challenges of racism and sexism show up. And we have to challenge them, because guess what? I wake up brown, I go to sleep brown, I go to work brown, all of that doesn't go away. And so of course I bring those challenges up, and then I'm disqualified. And so as soon as I'm disqualified, I'm dropped, and then the cycle starts over again with another person. And so I was really lucky with this election to find a party that I wanted to run with, which is One City. In their value statement, they talk about systemic racism, they talk about decolonizing. So I knew I don't have to kind of work on getting the party ready. They're ready, they can handle me, let's run with this. So, and it's a lot of work for a party as well, to want to both run a person like me and be able to support me when I get in. And so when I think about leadership, and I will wrap up, this is obviously like a very personal topic for me. You can't be what you can't see, but I think what's challenging about that is like, but if you can't imagine yourself up there, you'll never get there, because look at the diversity in Vancouver. We have so much varieties of like sexual orientation, gender, ethnicity, age, status in Canada, length of time, language, all of that. And then look at senior leadership positions, and there's no alignment. So if we can't imagine ourselves there, then we're totally screwed. So I think part of me with leadership is imagining what isn't there and placing myself there with the support of folks like you. So thank you. That's a start.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well with the microphone at a comfortable distance from my face. As Emily mentioned, my name is Amanda. My pronouns are she and hers. I'm the daughter of ethnically Chinese, Vietnamese refugees. And I was born and raised in Treaty 7, Alberta, the home of the Kainai and Tsuut'ina First Nations. upwards of 86% of my hometown population is white. So everything that I was able to do for these positions of leadership, again, I think we're all using that term with a little bit of just unsure of that term, because I went to leadership retreats in high school and I always felt like an outsider. I didn't know what it meant to be at a leadership. For me, leadership now is being able to see a path, not just for myself, but everyone coming after me. So I picture, if you've ever seen an aerial view of ships in the Arctic, the ship and a whole bunch of small little icebergs around it, and it's got to forge a way through. You've just got to navigate through the icebergs and see the potential for yourself, but also understand that it is mapping a path for others.
Thank you. Zena.
Thanks, Emily. I guess I want to start by saying a few things. One is to acknowledge I'm the only white woman on this panel, and I feel really mindful about how I take up space today. And I was joking with Emily and the others that the reason I'm the white woman they picked is because I'm super gay. So I feel like, in terms of situating myself, it is really important for me to name my identity as a queer person and as a queer femme, and that is really integral to the way that I lead and how I move through the world. I was also raised by a single mom in poverty in Northern Ontario, and that has been really formative in my life. Fundamentally, the work that I do in the world is about moving systems towards greater equity and justice. And a lot of that work centers around queer and trans health, because people in my community are dying. And so I wanna be able to help people stay alive. That is really the root of what I do, and it informs how I think about leadership. So in terms of answering Amanda's question, I just want to touch on a few thoughts. And this is maybe more sort of the abstract notion of what leadership is. I don't think leadership is something that we're born with, or something that automatically comes along with a job title or being kind of vested with a particular kind of power in a hierarchy. I think of leadership as a practice. It's something that we learn by doing, we learn by failing, and we keep practicing over time, hopefully for a lifetime if that's our intent. I really think that leadership can be a tool. It can be something that is practiced in a whole bunch of different ways. It's not neutral or one size fits all. And I think sometimes what leadership looks like in our institutions is actually really violent and oppressive. And I am really interested in thinking about leadership in service of collective liberation. And I definitely have thought about that through the lens of my experience of queerness. So those are some initial thoughts. The last thing I'll do is offer a couple of quotes I really like. Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky, in a book called Leadership on the Line, say that at its best, leadership is a labor of love. And I think for those of us who are women or doing care work in our communities, often love and leadership come together. And I want to finish by quoting Cornel West, who tells us that justice is what love looks like in public. And so I think that's a really important thing to think about in the context of our leadership practice. Thank you.
I already feel like one of my Thank you. And for anybody who really is enjoying this conversation, as I mentioned, this is being live streamed right now on the Vancouver Public Library's YouTube channel, but also the hashtag WD Satellite. So if you hear something quotable and you want to share it with your community of followers, please do. So thank you for sharing all of that. A lot to unpack. I want to go back to one of the comments before about you can't be it if you can't imagine it. And just wanted to get a sense from all of you whether you agree with that or whether you feel like you can't be it if you can't see it. I'll tell you very quickly. Last night I was on Twitter, and Arlen Hamilton, I don't know if any of you know her, she's a venture capitalist from the United States. She's a Black queer woman who has started this company to specifically fund underrepresented companies in tech that are Black, that are queer, that are people of color. And she was saying less than 10% of all venture capital goes to these groups. So she started this company to give $5 million. And then she tweeted this: people say you can't be what you can't see. I think you can be what you can't see. It just takes a hell of a lot longer. So I want to help cut that time in half for others. That's one of the reasons I do what I do. So I'm going to ask each of you, do you agree? Starting with you on the other inductions. Yeah.
Jeez. I was thinking, it's no problem. I'm going to have a few minutes to formulate my thoughts. It's a very complex question. I guess again, answering very much off the top of my head, I think this idea of, you know, you can't be if you can't imagine it, I think the power of imagination is actually really, really important. And one of the kind of lines of thought that is really informing a lot of my work right now is informed by folks like Adrienne Maree Brown and other people that are doing work actually informed by speculative fiction, visionary fiction, this idea of actually harnessing the power of imagination like as a tool of activism. So I think if we can actually kind of root into the power of imagination and the power of dreaming, that actually I think can be a critical way, kind of like you said, Amanda, about being able to imagine that path for yourself and the folks who come after it. But I also think that, you know, as we do this work, we need to be attentive to the fact that many of us are working against systems of oppression that are violent towards us and our communities, and also that we're walking with different kinds of privilege. So, you know, as we move forward in terms of the work of leadership, I know I try to think about how do I be really mindful of the ways that I am perpetuating oppression, you know, through the way that I am moving through the world, consciously or otherwise, and how do I use my privilege for good?
Love it. I'm going to hop over to Jennifer here because I was reading one of the links you sent me, and you were talking about what it was like speaking to young women who, you know, were like, I want to be something, and then you, in many ways, are the hope that they believed in. So can you talk about the power of seeing it in order to be it?
Yeah, thanks for reading that. I forgot about that. Yeah, I guess because I want to go back to kind of like the dangers of being that person. So yes, I do represent different identities, but like the category of women is not a homogenous category. Just like being a person of color is not a homogenous category, being like the child of immigrant parents is not homogenous. So being careful about that, because we can easily become representative of entire groups of people. And therefore, when I'm sitting at the board table making a decision, it's like, good, we've got the perspective from the people of color, from the women, and from the youngish people. Perfect. Let's pass that policy. Let's put that stamp on it. And that's very dangerous because I'm not a representative of all of anybody. And so for me, it's yes, it is providing an example of role modeling, of leadership, but more for me of what governance and policy processes can look like. So yes, this is part of my identity and that's who I am, but that shouldn't either make you want to support me or not support me, but my principles and values should be where that representation should come from. So yeah, so yes, I do represent different communities and different identities, but I would like to be followed because of my process and my governance. So this isn't a panel about governance and like good governance. It's a panel about being a person of color in a public-facing leadership position for me. But I'd love to change the narrative because I am a practitioner of policy and governance and process first. Because I'm a woman of color, I show up to transform and challenge those systems. So for me, like the way I approach leadership is upheld by people like me and broken down and rebuilt by people like me. So it's a huge responsibility, but it's very easy to fall into the trap, I think, of feeling like, yep, she's there, she's representative of, we're good to go. Yeah.
Before we go even further, because I do want to talk about systems, but I just want to make sure that we dive just a little bit deeper on how you got to this place. I read your bios, that's what you study, that's what you do, you know, that's your title. But I want you to tell me a little bit about how you got to the point that you are before we start talking about dismantling systems. So maybe we can start with you, Amanda. How did you get to this point of leadership in a concise way?
I think I just want to build on what Zena and Jen were just speaking about. For me, I never had any mentors or idols or teachers that looked like me. I'm still the only person of color in the entire design faculty at Carr University. And I'm a light-skinned East Asian woman who speaks with an accent. I have considerable privilege. But again, the danger of being that one person that if they think something might be offensive in a faculty meeting, they look at me to say, hey, is that offensive? Like, can we say that? And it's like, I don't want to be that person and representing all people of color or women of color. But I also want to acknowledge my own privilege. So like, how do I do that in these spaces where there's just so many layers of oppression, where being a person of color standing at the front of a classroom teaching design at Carr is like in itself a political act.
How did you get there?
Yeah, It's just wanting to be that person that I didn't have.
Okay, Zena?
I mean, I guess I would say there's two strands to the answer of how I got there. You know, part of that was about being raised by an activist mom who taught me those values from an early age, and that has really informed the way I move through the world. And I learned that I could be very good at school, and that helped me kind of clear a path in terms of the career trajectory that I had. And I also am here because I have white privilege, you know, and that's real. I have the privilege that comes with being cisgendered. I'm not a transgender person. I have the privilege that comes with being a white settler on Indigenous land, being an able-bodied person. So I also want to name that aspect of what cleared the path for me, because that's not everyone's experience.
And Jennifer, you have been a first, in a way, even though you say obviously you don't want to be representative of everyone. You want to represent you and your ideas and your own journey. But you are symbolic in many ways. You represent something that didn't exist before. Can you tell us just a little bit about how you got to this point of being elected?
So I don't feel like I'm there yet, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not done yet, and I feel like I started late in a way because I was like faced with so many barriers of, like, I've tried running before and faced a lot of challenges and didn't always have the right people around me to help me unpack what those experiences were really about. It actually made me think like, oh, maybe I don't have enough experience. Maybe I do need more education or more experience in the education sector or whatever it was. But this last time, I think the difference of getting elected for me was I had a whole team of women and people of color that came with me and knocked on doors, that talked to me when things went sideways, that prepped me for talks like this, that built my postcard. Amanda Huynh was one of the designers of my postcard, and I think the approach that she took was really to center credentials first, because people would always ask me that, and then my picture was on the back. So like, that's sad. That's such an awful way to design material, but it was effective. That's the world that we live in, and now I'm here to challenge that and to change that. But I also think I've been riding the coattails of merit. So like, merit is this idea that if I get all the experience and the education, I can ride right to the top, I'm good to go. I've earned my place. But that's not true, and just like we're talking about privilege and power, I can code switch very quickly. I grew up in the East Kootenays. I know how to move in that space. I know how to speak at the board meetings, but I can also connect with newcomer and immigrant refugee youth. And I'm always put in positions of leadership with those communities because I look like a successful immigrant. I didn't immigrate here, I grew up here. It's fascinating though, right? So yes, I think merit is important, and another like sort of a takeaway for me is really unpacking the idea of capability. So just because you build the best school in the middle of the city that has all the amenities we could dream of doesn't mean that people could get there, because they may not. And so this is something really that rides a lot on my shoulders, is that when I make decisions, it's not just about if you build it, they will come. There's a huge system, a structure of power at play that we can't unpack unless we want to see it, and those folks are not at the decision-making table. Children and youth are directly affected by all decisions at the school board and have no decision-making authority or power. So like, that puts things in perspective for me in terms of the responsibility at the decision-making table.
So much to unpack, and we're already almost halfway through. Oh my goodness. Okay, we're gonna go to the other end, because you talked about being able to code switch, being able to navigate essentially different environments to connect with people. You talked about, you know, being in the community, but also being able to sit at the boardroom table, which makes me wonder, how do you teach that kind of leadership? How do you prepare people so that they're able to lead in that way and be nimble and to move in different spaces? And I'm going to start with Zena, because I know you've been doing a lot of work around systemic change.
I mean, I think in terms of the teaching to navigate in those spaces, I know in terms of the mentorship that I do, it's really important to me to center that mentorship, whether it's formal or informal, on supporting other women, supporting queer folks, supporting folks of color, and passing on the knowledge that I have. I think one of the things I try to do is name the fact that, for example, we have to work with gendered and racialized and other, depending on our personal kind of social location, double standards in our work. So, for example, I was working with a colleague recently and was giving some feedback and grounded that feedback in the fact that you're a woman leader, there are gendered double standards being applied and it's a real thing. So how do we work strategically with that as women leaders and be aware of it? Because it is actually part of the environment while also trying to work to change it. So I think, again, working strategically and naming what's going on while also simultaneously trying to affect change is kind of the dual strategy that I try to use.
So language and naming things is a great start, is a great element of helping to change. Okay, Amanda. The question is, what can we do to help teach the kind of leadership that we want to see?
I think something that I've had to learn again and again as a university instructor is meeting the students where they are and understanding what I was like at that age. So I'm teaching students that are sometimes 18, sometimes they're like in their early 20s, and feeling in the classroom like they're being seen for the first time, or like their work is being understood and not just being bypassed for things like if they want to do a piece about colonialism and the instructor doesn't have the capacity or the language to engage with them in this work, and want to talk about the color instead or the shapes instead. So remembering that this might be the first time that they're feeling seen in the classroom spaces that I try and curate, and making them understand that I can be that person. So I feel like I've done an okay job, because I meet with a lot of students who are oftentimes not my students or not my students anymore, who come to me and say like, because I like them, or because they see that I understand where they're coming from, and then being a mentor in that way. So just like modeling the leadership and showing them that there's different ways of doing it.
Thank you. Jennifer, are there ways to kind of infiltrate the system to really help to teach people, not just on an individual basis, but really within the systems, and using more of a structure to kind of teach the kind of leadership that is more inclusive?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out. So I kind of thought that what I had studied was how the policy process works, but the process is so powerful and manipulative. It can be the difference between getting an idea through with the right dialogue behind it and not. And so an example that I can share that's shown me how powerful it is to actually learn the process as you go and be honest about what you're experiencing, because I think one thing I wish that I knew of is that like how to navigate that policy process and the governance and leadership system. So as an example, we were making a decision at the board around the facilities in the school, in the city, 114 facilities sitting on about $8 billion worth of land. So whether you have kids or not, this is your land, and it's my job as one of the trustees to steward this land over the next 4 years to make the system better than I found it for the next several hundred years. So that's my kind of perception of where I'm at. And what happened is I had made a motion, which is what you're supposed to do as part of learning the process, make a motion to postpone dialogue and debate on this until an equity and reconciliation lens was used on these suggested changes. So if you're going to close a school or consolidate a program, what would an equity analysis look like on that school or that community? Showed up at the meeting to find that my motion was removed. Deleted, like I wasn't even at the meeting. And so I'm an elected person, I have a seat at the table, I have, whatever, 50,000 votes in October. But if people aren't there to witness that process with me, like I'm completely alone in holding accountability. So I'm only as powerful as you make me in that process. So if anything I could say that I'm learning is that witnessing is just as much as having a seat at that table and calling it like it is. So I haven't figured that out yet. And I'm constantly being like distracted by some of these policy processes. But I'm figuring it out and learning as I go. So maybe in year 4, I'll have like the 3-part plan.
Awesome. So I heard modeling, witnessing, language, and naming are some really key pieces. So we talked about some ways to learn. Can we talk about what we needed to unlearn? So I would love to ask Zena, is there anything that you had to unlearn in order to feel like you could lead and be your full self?
Yeah, I think when I think back to my earlier years of formal leadership roles, which was a place I had to do a lot of experiential learning, I felt like I came in thinking that I had to be kind of hard and guarded all the time and not show emotion. And I think one of the most amazing journeys that I've had in terms of learning over the last 10 years of leadership practice has actually been about learning how to lead from a place of vulnerability and seeing that as strength, learning to lead in service of connection, and also learning to lead in a more embodied way. So this idea of actually recognizing that we are all human beings with feelings and bodies, and we are in context with one another. what does that mean in terms of how we interact with one another around how we might be feeling at work? Modeling healthy boundaries around needing to rest and take sick time. Again, I think they can be small examples, but I think can actually be really powerfully transformative in terms of how we physically and emotionally, as well as intellectually and practically show up in the workspace.
Awesome. Amanda or Jennifer, is there anything that you wanted to share about something you might have had to unlearn in order to become the leaders that you are?
I think it's this negotiation between learning and unlearning when to take up space. I was 100% that student at the back of the room who never spoke. It just getting sweaty palms whenever we were going to introduce our names around the table. But then also learning to speak up and when to take up space when I understand that I'm the person at the table who is representing maybe underrepresented voices, and also when to not speak when there are other people that deserve the time more. And that's something that I can see in myself, but I hope that it's something else that you can take away and just see who else is, what other voices or who else is at the table, but not only at the table, because as Jen is saying, she is at the table, but still having to see all these continuing forms of oppression. So it's if people are at the table that are underrepresented, then how to create a safe space for them and how to keep learning and keep unlearning so that they can continue their work. It's not just about hiring a person or bringing somebody on board and being like, great, that is taken care of forever and ever. But actually enabling them and empowering them in order for yourself to learn and learn to work towards liberation.
Thank you. I want to ask you about why we aren't further along. There are all of these policies and practices, and I think there is some sincere place, and yet we are where we are. Why is that? Let's start with you, Jonathan.
Well, people don't trust politicians. So that's something I realized because I had so much trust in the communities that I worked with prior to wanting to run. And a lot of people didn't want to be a part of that after I became partisan and declared my interest in wanting to be a public-facing leader. So I think just as much as I have to build it. It's not like maintaining it because my role is different now. I can't just do things that people are asking me to because I know them. Surprise. So, but of course some leadership positions do that, and that's problematic. But I think at the same time, the other piece is trusting the people that are coming to you. So when a student says, I'm facing racism at school, or a family saying, look, we don't have a hot breakfast program, can you help us? I need to be able to trust that that is their experience and that they're coming to me because they trust I can do something about it. So just as much as I want people to trust me, I also need to trust in them and what they're bringing forward. So I think that the reason why we're lagging so much is that traditional forms of political leadership assume that once you've got the seat, you know what people need and you will represent that voice. You don't need to consult. At least that's my perception of what I see sometimes in elected positions. But for me, the only way I can make decision-making processes valuable is by knowing what's happening here and now, as opposed to what I think was happening 10 years ago, or what it was like when I was in school, or what my kids are going through. I don't have kids, but I often hear that as an example, that, well, my friend went through this, so that must be how it is. So no, it's my job to listen and ask questions from many people, even people that aren't coming to me, but me going to them.
So trusting people's lived experience is a fundamental part of that. Zena, I'd like to ask you, because you work in the healthcare sector, and I'd love to get you to share a little bit about why the work you're doing and why we aren't further ahead in terms of having really inclusive policies that make everyone feel reflected and, as you wrote in your tweet and your blog, affirmed. Why are we still not where we should be?
I think the shortest but also perhaps most complex answer is our health system exists in our society, right? And so as much as I would love for our health system to be a place where every person could access care in an equitable, affirming way, we all know, and I'm sure some of us in this room more than others know, that that is not actually the experience you're going to have when you're walking into a doctor's office, for example, or going to get STI testing, or going into the emergency department. And that's because we see homophobia, we see racism, we see transphobia, we see sexism. For example, there is literature showing that medical practitioners have racist, sexist assumptions around Black women and Black folks feeling less pain than other people. That actually impacts someone's experiences of accessing medical care. So, I mean, for me, the work I do in the health system is really about connecting with healthcare providers, with medical students, with folks that are doing that work to help them learn about and think through what those things mean at a system level, but also like at a one-to-one sort of patient interaction level. So that's kind of what it looks like in the context of the advocacy work that I do. And in the context of the work I do in research funding, it's also making sure that we can help researchers think about, well, what questions are you asking? Who are you working with to answer those questions? And how are you making sure that the answers actually help the folks who need the greatest support in being able to feel healthy and thriving?
So we've talked about some of the experiences. Let's talk about some of the actions we can all take going out of this room to hopefully make things a little bit better in our own way. Do you have any suggestions for us on individual actions that we can take to create a more inclusive leadership landscape? Jennifer, you're nodding, so I'm going to start with you.
Especially in the political process at the municipal level, is bringing people to meetings. Students, parents, community members are all invited to present. And so that's a really important access to power, I think, that maybe is underestimated or we don't think we belong because historically people were actually barred from even entering these spaces. So recognizing to bring someone along, whether it's like a child or a partner or a friend, that's been really important. And when I see young people speaking for the first time at their first committee meeting about their experience and feeling so powerful to see us reference their conversations later in decision-making processes, that's transformative. And that can also be the difference between a person seeing themselves in that room, maybe in a decision-making capacity in the future and not. So I think I'll put myself out there to say that if you're interested in getting involved in that, or you know young people that want to maybe run or simply be a witness or come and present, like talk to me, because that's definitely my motivation and something I can do in my role.
So if you are in a role where you are hiring or you look at job postings, then I think one concrete way of addressing some of these issues is being able to look at what you're asking for. And I know there's a big appetite for hiring, intersectional oppressed, asking for a lot of potential emotional labor, potential. Understand that you're also asking for, in most cases, like a terminal degree, a master's, a PhD, and that is what people of considerable get to have. So you're asking for them to already have gone through all of this and checked all these boxes of like having a master's, a PhD, however many years of experience that you can count as experience that's relevant to your work, but also these other things. So how do we value, get to the point that, it's not between the three of us, there's probably like a pile of degrees, respectable leadership role women, but I hope that is not always the case. I hope that we value lived experience more and what that can bring to the table, more than a Eurocentric patriarchal degree.
She said it. Okay.
Yeah, I think one concrete action I would encourage folks to take coming out of this room is to reflect on what leadership means to you and like how you do or don't associate with the idea of being a leader. And to think about, well, what are the leadership lessons you've picked up, formally, informally, through your jobs, through your schooling, through your work in community, through the mentors and ancestors who are important in your life, and think about what that actually concretely means for the way that you want to lead. I mean, that reflection I think is really important. And then I would say for folks who are white or who are carrying other forms of privilege, also think about when is it time to step back and step aside. I think that's a really important practice to continue working with and actually doing as often as possible.
Shall we open up the floor? This has been a great conversation so far, don't you think?
Yeah.
Thank you for being so willing to share. Do we have any questions? Because we have time for them. Yes, please stand up.
Hi everyone, my name is Sharon Ramsey and I'm a marriage and family therapist in Toronto. And I, maybe bouncing off what Zena you just said, I would add leadership is not just about looking out to the also people within our lives. I can think of my grandmother, who was not able to finish school because of racial biases in her home country, but who was able to demonstrate a level of hospitality and welcome to people that I want to be part of how I do my thing. The other thing that I could say that's more common is that stepping aside, looking for amplifying other voices, and not to discredit what you bring, with or without a degree, with or without all the fancy purses and all that jazz as women that we might want to have as pretty. There's something about, I have something to say, and I'm offering it, rather than, you have to hear me, because I feel like we have to learn to navigate the systems in order to find our place. Last thing I'll say, as my father would say, do not live down to anybody's expectations.
Anyone else? Questions, comments? We've got a little bit of time. Otherwise, trust me, I've got a full page of questions. Shall I keep going? Does anybody else have a question? Otherwise, I have other questions I'd love to ask our panelists. Yes.
I'm on a leadership team at a nonprofit in Vancouver, and I recently, through coaching, sort of pinpointed why I was always having to basically shout to get my voice heard and to get my opinions recognized, and I was like, why is this happening? Like, I have the experience, I got here legitimately. What is it about me that is making me feel like nobody is listening to me? And through coaching, I sort of pinpointed, well, I'm making the youngest person on our leadership team, and I'm female. And it makes me so angry, first of all. But second of all, what can I do? Like, what do I do? Like, I pinpointed this, and I'm a strong, I have a loud voice. What do I do about it?
That's a great question. Do you have any advice? I know, Zena, maybe we can start with you, and then we'll go down the line if there's anything else to add. That would be great.
I mean, my first piece of advice is don't gaslight yourself. Like, and that is that idea that you are sort of, experiencing something and people or forces around you are telling you it isn't happening. You're probably experiencing a pretty shitty cocktail of racism, sexism, and ageism. So that's real. I actually feel like that's step one. And it sounds like you're working through step one. And I imagine the brilliant people beside me have suggestions for steps two.
Jennifer, you must be at tables all the time. You talked about being the youngish person and being at these tables. I'm sure you've experienced this. How do you deal with it?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and I'd love to connect with you more about it because it is so personal, and it depends on the situation as well. But I would say it's more about the other people at the table, because that's where allyship comes in. Like, it's not about us always trying to change our behavior or the way we speak or the next degree that we're going to get, but it's about the other people that we're around. So I'd love to chat about this specific instance because I don't think that's sort of like a one-size-fits-all situation.
Can we unpack maybe in your answer, Amanda, what does allyship look like in action, for example, in a situation like that?
Okay, so as you're asking your question, I wanted to share something that I think about quite a bit, which is that women, and in particular women of color, tend to speak really quickly because we're used to being interrupted.
Yes.
So,
100%. Yeah.
So if we want to talk about allyship, it's thinking about how you can afford space to women who are speaking and actually listen to what they're saying instead of going right ahead and gaslighting them. But one big thing for me is whether it's women that are like me or women that are allies, being able to find this circle of support that will affirm, because you will need this emotional support. It's just the truth of what we're doing is being able to share these things that happen, the microaggressions that build up over work or in the meeting, somebody to help you, or a group of women or like-minded people or allies to support you outside of what you're doing, so that you can go back in feeling energized, and you're really energizing each other because you're providing the space and the support and the laughter.
One of the techniques that I've heard quite a bit, if it's helpful, is the name and repeat technique. So if somebody says something in a meeting and you feel like they are being overlooked or rushed or not heard, as an ally, you have an opportunity to say, I'm sorry, repeat your name? Jasmine, to be like, Jasmine just said this, I think, here's the idea, Jasmine just said this, I think it's great. It's really reinforcing, and it's not taking credit for something that somebody else has put on the table, but really showing that you are in support of them. I wanted to touch on the second piece though, because it was one of my questions. How do you address instances of injustice or blatant discrimination without being angry? Does anybody want to take that? Everybody's like, taking notes. Anyway, I welcome the opportunity from you because you've had to do it, all three of you, in very kind of high profile spaces where people are really looking at how you respond.
I'm okay with getting mad, I guess. Because it is enraging when you face racism and sexism, when you've got ideas that you want to bring forward that are bigger than your identity, or the composition or some of your identities. So I think it's okay to get angry, to name and repeat yourself, because sometimes you're the only one to name and repeat your own idea. Yeah. So just to say, excuse me, I'm not finished yet. I said, and those are real strategies, if you can call them that, but they're coping techniques, and I think it's okay to be angry because it is an angering system until all of us are in leadership positions. Yeah.
I've heard, sorry, okay, I'm gonna ask one question and then go ahead, Cheryl, you go and then I'll ask my question after. From Toronto.
From Toronto, Paul. Applicant and ambassador for Vision. Dilution and diminishing. As a woman of color, I find myself having to present half of myself or more of myself in every space that I'm in because I am too much. Too strong, too vocal, too educated, too strong. And anything beyond a whisper of passion is misinterpreted as anger. Thank you. Amen. I wanted to just quickly add this question because I feel like you were already going there. My question is, how have you freed yourself to be your full self without the misinterpretations, without the caging in, without the wrongful assessments?
Otherwise, I'm going to start picking people. So, I'm giving you a second because these are deep questions. So silence is okay sometimes when we ask these questions. They're ones where you need to think about the insights. But given that, we've got a few minutes, so I'm going to start with Jennifer.
Okay, obviously I have an opinion about everything. So thanks for the question. I think groups like this actually help me a lot. It's like speaking to folks who will understand, and if it makes a connection between any of us today, I think that's therapeutic for me, is to know that you care about this topic, you're listening, you're paying attention to it. So it makes me feel like I'm not isolated in these topics. So that alone is huge for me, but so for example, like I have a lot of jobs. So I'm a trustee, I'm an associate director at SFU, and I founded this organization called EdMico with a bunch of young people. But the reason why I do that work with EdMico is that it's all young refugees who are still trying to complete their high school diplomas and haven't been able to because of systemic barriers and forced displacement and all kinds of issues. But those young people, those young women and men, and they really bring forward so much reason and value to why I want to do that work and show up again, because it's so much to tolerate, it's so much to accept and move through, that when you are being like misinterpreted or misjudged, that your passion is coming across as anger or whatever the case might be, you just have to remember like what it's for, and it's for those kids. And so I think that's, yeah, if that helps, I think it's okay to sometimes be busy with things that remind you why you go back to that board table, or why you go back to that job or that meeting.
Even with your school, it took you a while to get to that point. I'm sure people still perceive you as quite a strong personality and a strong leader when you're ready. Is there ever a time where you feel like people even see you being too much, or even your existence, whether you do anything at all, is just too much just by you being you?
Yeah, I didn't realize that because I've been socialized to make myself so small and my voice so small for so much of my life. I didn't realize that I had any authority at all until some of my students started to tell me, like, you know, the first day of class, but I really love what Jennifer is saying, because it's thinking about the why. It is thinking about these students that I'm being there for, and the youth that I can empower, whether it's at Carr or in the future at Pratt or in Chinatown and some of the organizing there. How to free myself and like be my full self. I think these constant reminders of why I'm doing it, it's like really for the youth. It's things that are bigger than me. When I have students that see my work or like see what I'm doing and be like, oh my gosh, like I want to be like you. I'm like, no, you don't want to be like me. You want to be above and beyond what I'm doing. Like I don't want to be your ceiling. I want to be the floor for you. So that's what will be.
Zena, you speak all the time.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things I would say, Cheryl, like you were, I think, not out loud, but also naming the angry black woman stereotype. So I want to put that into the room and say that that's not something that I have ever grappled with or will ever grapple with in my life. So as I answer your question, know that that's part of what's in the room with us. But I mean, I think I love the resonance between what I heard from Jennifer and Amanda, because I jotted down some notes when I was trying to think through my answer. It's the nice thing about being purpose, my value, my community values, and my community and my lineage. So I have pictures in my bedroom of my great-grandmother holding me in her lap, my grandmother, on my mother's side, pushing me on a swing when I was a little girl, and my mom, who passed in 2014, her holding me on her lap. And I have a picture of my 14-month-old as a little baby, all together. And I look at those pictures every day. And I think about my lineage and what is coming after me. And that is deeply informing how I move through the world. So it's like how to think beyond this moment, how to think beyond this lifetime. I also think there is power in moving past shame and into pride. You know, that's something I think about a lot as a queer person, and I think that enables me to lead authentically. So I think that is also kind of part of how I would answer that question, though I could talk a lot more about this.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Yes.
My name is Joyce. I live with this as my home. Cheryl, to answer to that, I think maybe I'm just a little bit longer in the tooth than you are. I'm getting to a point, I'm working on a point of saying, I don't give it. Because I will show, yes, I'm an angry black woman, duh. The justice system doesn't work for me. The medical system doesn't work for me. The education system doesn't work for me. So why would I not be angry? When I go to work, I work more than 2.5 times my colleagues, but it's still not satisfactory. So why would I not be angry? I have a reason to be an angry black woman. You should be lucky I'm not walking around with a bazooka. I'm saying that facetiously, but I've got to a place, I am a little older, so I'm claiming that. Yeah, call me an angry black woman, and then you can explain to me why I shouldn't be an angry black woman.
Thank you for your comment. So we're close to the end, and I've got rapid fire questions for you because we're running out of time. When I say rapid, I mean rapid. Don't overthink it, just be honest.
Don't overthink it.
No, just be honest. Here we go. What's the one thing people rarely ask you or say to you as a diverse woman in leadership that you wish they would? If I had to answer it for this audience, I would say thank you. People probably don't say that enough. Thank you for the work. Anyone else?
This is very profound, but it's, have you had breakfast?
Okay, next. What's the one resource we should all to help advance this work? It could be a book, blog, somebody to follow on social, a practice. One thing, a resource that we can all use and explore to advance this work.
I mean, my extremely self-serving answer is There's a talk on my website called Queering Leadership, so if you want the deep dive into my super gay thoughts on leadership, you can find it on the internet.
What's the one action each of us can take to be a better ally? I'll give that to you, Amanda.
Sitting down sometimes.
And what is the one question we should all ask ourselves walking out of this room? Something we can take with us to really ensure we don't forget this conversation.
Go ahead.
Go
I would
ahead,
say,
Jennifer.
what does love and joy look like in leadership?
No, I think that's great, yes.
What do I need to do this work for the long haul with love and joy, right?
All of that, and am I making this system better or worse? And for who?
And I'm going to take liberties and have the last word. People often say, who's missing from the table? My favorite question is, what table already exists that needs your presence? And what possibilities can happen if you are sitting there? Thank you so much. It's 1 o'clock. It's been an honor. If Christina has any other remarks, otherwise I think my goal was just to thank you for being here and remind you